Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Tim, Lilly, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Tim, I guess we should start by talking about how we know each other. You and I met back in 1993. Is that right?
I would say it was right around there, 93, and you had just come out of EOBC.
EOBC, and somebody didn't like me, and they put me in charge of the A&O platoon for a couple of minutes.
Yeah,
go
ahead.
I was just saying, and then they fortunately put me on the line 2 years into that.
We had some good times at the A&O platoon. I was a combat construction foreman for you.
That's right. I forgot about that.
I was your construction foreman.
Yeah, that was an interesting bunch. You either loved or hated them, and they either loved or hated whoever was in a leadership position.
Right. They didn't react well to leadership.
Typically not, especially the typical lieutenant that comes out of school or some sort of military training that thinks they already know everything.
Right. And then you get the guy that's been in the Guard less than 4 years.
Right. Exactly. But you and I really got close when you were the readiness NCO in Bravo Company, and it was our platoon. You were the platoon sergeant, I was the PL, and we spent about a year prepping for Fort Polk.
Right, JRTC at Fort Polk.
Yeah, that was something. We don't have to talk too much about that if you don't want to.
That was good training. I had a great time.
No, it was fantastic training. I wouldn't complain about it at all. You have one thing to complain about. You were telling me a few weeks ago what happened the first day we went into the box.
Oh, when we did that night landing, we were going across the LZ, and I stepped in a gopher hole and put a stress fracture in my ankle.
You literally broke your ankle.
I literally broke my ankle.
And then you walked around on it for the next, 2 weeks?
For the next 2 weeks. And it gets gooder than that. I was supposed to go to ANOC the week after we got back from Polk. So I came home and I was training for the PT test, running on it every day.
Hmm.
Yeah. Went out to Fort Leonard Wood for ANOC with that fractured ankle.
And you thought you had just sprained it, right? You didn't realize you had a stress fracture.
Right. I thought I just sprained it. I mean, it hurt. But I did well on a PT test, which was a lesson for me. Never do well on PT tests. But all kidding aside, I did well, and I ended up in the A group for running every morning. Mm. And the ankle lasted, under that stress, the ankle lasted almost halfway through, about 3.5 week mark when it snapped.
And tell a story of when it snapped.
Well, we were running, and we were going up this hill around a corner. It was still dark, and I thought I'd just stepped on a stick because it just cracked, and the whole group heard it, and we thought I'd stepped on a stick, and I rolled off to the side of the road, and I thought I'd rolled my ankle at that point. And so I made my way back to the gym, and there wasn't anybody there. So I went ahead and caught a cab down to the hospital and had them look at my ankle. And that's when they x-rayed it, put me on a cast from the knee all the way to the toe, and said I was headed home, and I had a broken ankle.
And long story short, you ended up finishing ANOC. You convinced them that you needed to stay, right?
I did. I asked them, I said, well, how do I stay here? And they said I needed an orthopedic surgeon to approve it. So, and it was a series of miracles, sir, how God worked the whole situation, because I asked him where his office was, and they told me where it was, but they said he doesn't come in till about 9:00. And this was 6:30, 6:45 now. So I went there, and I was just sitting in his office when he came in about 7:00. He'd come in early that morning. And I asked me what I was doing there, and I told him what had happened. And he said, well, what do you want me to do? And I said, figure out a way for me to stay. So he just kind of looked at me and said, "Come on in." And he had a good program. He said it was going to hurt, and he wasn't lying. It hurt, but he basically cut the cast off, gave me a walking splint system and some pain pills, and said, "Go get a big pair of boots and lace them up." So I gimped around in tennis shoes for a couple of days till I could get to the thrift store, and I bought I think they were like size 13 combat boots. and I just set one of them on the shelf, and every morning after that, the guys would hear me getting dressed because I had to lay on my back and put this boot up in the air and take a deep breath and then just shove my foot into it.
Mm. I've got a couple questions. Well, I actually have more than a couple. So when you busted, when it snapped, when it sounded like you stepped on a twig or a branch, weren't you in excruciating pain, or was your body already conditioned to not feel that?
I don't remember feeling any pain at that point. Like I say, I thought I'd rolled my ankle. It did hurt. Obviously couldn't run anymore, so it hurt. I limped back, walking back.
Yeah, that's crazy. And were you the only National Guard guy there?
No, there were a couple other guys there, AGR guys, because only AGRs could go there. It was the active duty ANOC at Fort Leonard Wood, so there were a couple of other AGR guys there. But
the regular Army guys looked at you guys a little bit differently coming from the Guard, right?
They did, but it was misplaced. They learned pretty quickly that it's a completely different. And I think that as a readiness NCO going to ANOC, I had an advantage over the regular soldiers. Your standard staff sergeant in the Army, he's run a squad, and that's what he knows. But for an AGR readiness NCO, he's run a squad, a platoon, depending on his rank. I was in E7 at that time. Well, actually, I'm sorry, I was still a staff sergeant. So I had more experience being a first sergeant, helping the first sergeant throughout the month, helping the commander throughout the month, collateral duty as safety officer, physical security officer, you name it. So we had a much broader exposure to the Army experience than the active duty staff sergeants and sergeant first classes did.
Yeah, I mean, the way I described readiness NCOs, and I worked with a bunch of them, you were definitely in my top 10%. You guys did everything besides supply 28 days out of a 30 or 31 day month.
We did. And actually, some of us got to do supply too.
we won't dive into that.
Yeah, up in Warrenton, I had to pull the supply sergeant route for about 90 days when I was between supply sergeants.
Whew. That can't be fun.
That was not fun at all. That was probably the most scary because you signed for the supply room and all the weapons.
No, I'm telling you, I got to be commander in a couple different units, and my worst 2 days of command was taking inventory and signing for all that stuff, and then hoping that it was all still there when I left command.
That's right. Yeah, and seldom is it always all there,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
So,
we'll just call it the art of supply management.
It is an art for sure.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So, Tim, where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small town in southern West Virginia. It's in Summers County. Name of the town is Huntington.
You and I were talking a few weeks ago. I've been to southern West Virginia. You corrected me on the name of the counties down there, but our unit out of Fredericksburg ended up going down there to help the citizens of southern West Virginia who had experienced what I can only describe as severe flooding in the middle of the night. Like, they had no warning or very little warning. And I've never seen in-person devastation like that. Did you experience that at any point when you lived there growing up?
I'm not sure what year you went, sir, but I think, if memory serves me, you fell in behind us. I think the 276
Oh, that's right.
was the first Virginia Guard unit in West Virginia for those floods. And that was around 2000, 2001, I want to say.
It was 2001 because I left a little bit early because my son was about to be born.
Right.
Yeah, it was 01.
And that was I mean, growing up in West Virginia, I can remember, we always watched the creeks rise because, we all had a creek either in the front yard or the backyard. And, but that was the most devastation I had seen from a flood was when we went into McDowell County.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like a bomb went off.
It was. And, we were just clearing roads and we were just pushing the debris. And I hate to say it because, describe it as debris, but because it was people's lives. We were just pushing them to the side of the road. And I'm sure by the time you guys showed up, the debris, you were going through a ditch down the road when you went down Route 52. It looked like a ditch in a lot of places because we had just piled the debris up so high on either side.
Yeah, I think we were a day or two behind y'all. And by the time we got there, they said, hey, just find a holler where there's been devastation, where there were places where they resided in these hollers and do whatever you can to help them out. And so we were literally taking direction from whoever the senior citizen was in that location.
Right. And that's what we had established. When we went in, we cleared the main route and established the lodgement there at the high school.
Yeah.
And then after that, we began to push squads and elements out to the various little communities up the hollows. And
yeah, I have a very distinct image that I'll never forget. We pulled into this holler, and I'm saying holler. How do you say it?
Holler is good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm close. I'm in the region. I think.
Yeah, holler is fine.
Yeah, and there was a guy sitting on the cinder block foundation of what used to be his house, and I walked up to him. It looked like he had the 1,000-yard stare going, like whatever he had experienced the previous couple of days, he just didn't know what to make of it. And I asked him where his house was, and he said, I'm about a mile away from here. And so that little creek had become like a raging river and moved homes half a mile away. It's unbelievable.
It was. I was talking to people who had been in church that night when it came, and they went out the back of the church and straight up the mountain. And that they said the water was 20, 25 foot deep when it went past them. And they were just hanging on to the trees on the side of the mountain.
It's unbelievable. That I've never been in something that's that scary, I don't think. And I mean, I've lived a bit of life, but nothing like that.
I couldn't imagine it.
Yeah. But the good news is I think we did our part to help them out. The Red Cross, I think, was pretty big there. I don't know if there were other entities there, but I felt proud to be a guardsman helping those folks out.
I did too. We saw the Red Cross, the Salvation Army was there, and we were actually relieved by the South Carolina National Guard.
Mm.
They came in and did their AT there.
Yeah, I think there were at least 5 states that tried to do their part.
Yeah, but no, that was something else for sure.
Yeah. All right. So, what was it like growing up in West Virginia?
I didn't know how great it was. I mean, we never knew we were poor because we always had a roof and we always had food. But it was great. It really was. We were close. It was a small town. We knew everybody. Our families were close by. And I just basically played outside all the time. I mean, Mom would open the door after breakfast and kick us kids out, and we just had to be home by dark. And we didn't have street lights to tell us when, we literally, when it got dark, we would come home.
Yeah. So, breakfast to sundown.
Right. And I can remember after I grew up, and we were talking one day, and I was telling her how far I'd travel on some of those days, and I think I saw concern come across her eyes, because we would sometimes be miles from home.
Parents, your parents' generation, my parents' generation, ignorance was absolutely bliss when it came to the kids.
That's right. Yeah, we had, but it was good, Grew up in a small town. I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Yeah, and being around a lot of families, pretty important. You take it for granted as you're growing up, and when you look back at it, you realize you were very fortunate.
That's right.
When you were in like middle school, high school kind of age, I guess, or maybe it was junior high and high school, how would I have thought of you? Were you an athlete? Were you academically inclined? All the musical? What were you doing like when you were 15, 16, 17?
I would have to describe myself as my counselors and teachers would describe me, which would be a rebellious underachiever.
But Tim, I've known you since the early 90s. You're a very bright, highly capable guy. Why were you like that as a teenager?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to blame my parents for anything, because you can't blame your parents after you leave home for anything that's happened to you. But growing up in a small town, my dad worked for the railroad, and Hinton was a railroad town that had been built by the railroad for the express purpose of supporting the railroad hub there, so that they could haul the coal down the New River Gorge. Well, the summer of 7th grade, I went through 7th grade there, and then Dad got transferred to Huntington.
Okay.
Which is a home of Marshall University. It was a big city by any standard, certainly a big city by West Virginia standards. And so we were moved down there that summer. I started junior high there, didn't know anybody, and these kids had pretty much been together since kindergarten. And so I have a lot of empathy now for military kids that get transferred every couple, 3 years. How tough that is. And I can say I didn't fit in, which made me rebellious. I'd always been kind of an underachiever, is what the teachers told me. And why, I don't know. It all changed later in life. But no, you probably wouldn't have liked me if you'd have met me 15 through. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reminded all the time, being the father of well, he's a young man now, but the male brain doesn't fully form until the mid-20s. And so I imagine you not knowing anybody, moving as a young teenager, combined with your brain not being fully formed, led to you maybe underachieving and the rest of it. Yeah.
Right. And I think when you feel like a misfit, you kind of fall in with the other misfits. And when you get a group of misfits together, anything can happen, and most of it not good.
Most of it not good, but some of it I'm sure was fun.
I would say all of it was fun. Yeah. I'm not saying I didn't have fun. I'm just saying I didn't prescribe to society's rules.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that's a good thing too.
Yeah.
All right. So when did the possibility of joining the United States Navy happen for you?
Well, I was in Marshall University. The high school was so eager to get rid of me that they let me take dual enrollment classes at Marshall. And back in those days, dual enrollment, the college didn't come to you. You actually went to college. And so I would go to my senior year, I was in high school in the morning. And then in the afternoon, I would transition to my freshman classes at Marshall.
Tim, that doesn't sound like underachieving.
Well, I could have done better. I wasn't classically doing well, but no, just satisfied. You just feel restless. So over Christmas break, when I was looking at, am I going to go back to school in January? And my dad and I had a fallout over tuition and whose responsibility it was to pay for tuition. And so I found myself sitting on the street corner there at the curb in front of the recruiting station one morning. And you know how the Armed Forces recruiting stations are kind of like a mall.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an outer door, and then you walk into a lobby, and then there's these 4 little office doors. Well, I'm just sitting there with a cigarette and a cup of coffee, and Navy guy walks up, says, "Hey, can I help you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just looking for something new." And he big old cheesy grin. He said, "Come on in." And
yours is easiest recruiting seat in months.
I'll tell you what, I was just like his Christmas present. And he opened the outer door, and as we went in, and as he was opening the inner door, the Marine recruiter came in right behind him. So that's how I ended up in the Navy. The Navy guy was first.
Yeah, because otherwise you had no connection to the Navy, right?
Well, my dad had been Navy.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, my dad was Navy. I had one uncle that was Navy during World War II, but that was it.
Yeah, it's still a lineage, right?
Right. It was, but so the Navy guy took me in, gave me some tests, and again, you know, because here I am, I'm just looking for a little bit of adventure, maybe a change from Huntington, and so he said, "What do you want to do?" And at the time, I'd had some experience working as an electrician. I'd spent the summers working as an electrician's helper, and so I said, "Well, how about the Seabees?" But they were full from Vietnam. So he said, let's do the ASVAB and see where you fall in. And so I did fairly well on the ASVAB. And he steered me toward the advanced electronics program, which meant that I hadn't picked a rating. So I just knew that I was in advanced electronics. And that was a 6-year obligation he wrote me up for. And to go into an advanced electronics field. So I left Huntington that January, right after Christmas.
Was the idea that you were going to do some time in the Navy and then have that apply to civilian life and you go from there? Or was it, hey, I just need to be somewhere else other than Huntington?
Yeah, I was just looking for a way out. Yeah, just to change. At that time, I didn't have career aspirations. And I wasn't looking to be educated for a future job. So that's why I say it was definitely the Lord working ahead in my life, because if I'd had my choice, I'd have been an able-bodied seaman scraping paint on some ship tied to a pier somewhere.
You'd have been just fine with that, huh?
I thought, yes. It worked out a lot better the way it worked out. But so I went to Great Lakes, basic training, went through basic electricity and electronics. And then when it came time to pick your rating, they had this big chart on the wall in the barracks. And, you know, all the advanced electronics fields are highlighted. So I'm going down through them. And again, electronic warfare just was another blessing, because they had the coolest rating badge. These little neutrons with a lightning bolt. But I tried to get the aviation electronic warfare because they had the EW symbol with wings, and you got to ride in planes and helicopters. But that was full, so I ended up in the fleet, going to Pensacola, Florida, for a year of school, and being in electronic warfare tech aboard warships.
So wait a minute. Your decision was most heavily influenced, or at least your preferences were most heavily influenced by the badge.
Yeah, it was, man. It looked like a Metallica album cover.
To be 1819 again. Oh man.
Right. Yeah. The thing, how we think. You're right. The brain wasn't fully formed.
Yeah, no doubt. So did you get to see the world in the Navy? Because you were active Navy for about 10 years, right?
10 years. Sailed from the East Coast and the West Coast, and I've seen pretty much the world. I mean, there are bits and pieces. I've got 28 countries, so there are some big pieces. But I sailed from San Diego westward to Africa. I've circumnavigated South America. I've sailed from the East Coast eastward to Africa. Never made it into the Mediterranean, and or anything like that. But
when you left San Diego to go to Africa, did you come around the tip of South America, or did you keep going west?
actually, we went north. We left San Diego and we steamed north up to Alaska, and then we followed the Aleutians into the Sea of Okhotsk, down into the Sea of Japan. Made some port calls along the way. Got a globe?
I'm looking at one right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Made some port calls around Japan, the Philippines. Then we went through the Straits of Malacca, past Singapore, into the Indian Ocean. And then we moved down to Mombasa, Kenya. And then from there, we made our way back.
So how many ports did you hit roughly?
I'd have to do some math. Hong Kong, Singapore, maybe 3 in Japan, Guam, Mombasa. Did I miss one?
All right. Without getting yourself in any trouble, what were the port calls like?
Port calls are always great. Port calls were always great. I was still, even in the Navy, I was a little bit rebellious. There was a period from age 15 to age 25, which I refer to as the lost decade. I was pretty rambunctious. So some of the port calls were pretty rowdy.
Yeah, I mean, can you believe that the Navy just allows sailors to? How long would the port calls last typically?
It depends. Sometimes a couple of days, 5 days, depending on what you were doing. Like when we were in Guam, we spent almost a month in Guam. They have a shipyard facility there, so we pulled into Guam and did a maintenance upkeep on the ship. So we were there for a while.
There's not a lot on Guam, right?
Yeah, there actually is. Guam's it's a Pacific paradise.
Okay.
There's a Air Force base at the north end of the island, a Navy base at the southern end, a road from main gate to main gate, and then the Marines are all from one of the sides.
So the Army was the only branch smart enough not to go to Guam, is what you're saying?
No, I'm sure they were there. We just didn't see them. They were somewhere.
I mean, Guam is nicely located if you're trying to have international influence.
It is, and it's a great duty station if you like to fish and swim and just be outside. Speaking
of fishing, did you grow up hunting and fishing?
I did.
Tell me about that, because I didn't grow up hunting and fish. I did a little bit of fishing, no hunting, because my dad didn't. But I'm guessing your dad and maybe some uncles and older family members hunted and fished.
Yeah, they did a lot more fishing than they did hunting. We didn't have the deer had been pretty much killed at that time in southern West Virginia. Deer were really rare if you saw one. But we grew right up right on the banks of the New River. So there was a lot of fishing going on, a lot of smallmouth fishing, muskie, and catfish.
And did you typically go ahead?
It was just something we did all the time, just different fish in different times of the year.
Did you eat what you caught most of the time?
We did, without a doubt. Yeah, that's why there weren't any deer. There was no such thing as catch and release in those days.
Yeah, I imagine nobody cared.
Well, everybody's hungry. So if you caught it, you ate it.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Hunger's a powerful force.
It is. Yeah, it was just subsistence hunting, fishing.
Yeah, I get it. All right, so back to the Navy. What is your most memorable story from the Navy, or proudest moment from the Navy, or both? And maybe it's the same story.
Yeah, there's a lot of good moments. Probably, I caught a Russian submarine one time.
Say more.
Yeah, in those days, it was the Soviet Union in those days, and we were playing cat and mouse during the Cold War, and we were actually escorting. I was assigned to the USS George Phillip, FFG 12, and we were escorting the Enterprise aircraft carrier, and so we were out doing our picket duty, and picked up a radar signal for a Soviet submarine, and I only caught it on 2 passes, because radars rotate, and when the signal comes around, you can pick it up. But I had a high level of confidence of what it was, and I reported it. There were no submarines known to be in the area, and so it was a risk, but my chain of command supported me, and they sent us out on the bearing to try to locate it.
Mm.
And sure enough, we found it, a broken Soviet submarine floating on the water, and it was trying to link up with its repair ship. So it was only using a radar minimally to try to find a repair ship. And here we come steaming over the horizon. And of course, as soon as we saw it and reported it, all the cool guys from the carrier flew over and took credit. But yeah, no. But the ship and the captain and skipper and it rolled down to me. We all got a little attaboy for that one.
Well, so I mean, you detect a Soviet sub, you believe it's a Soviet sub. How much of that is you as a person deducing what it is versus the equipment helping you figure it out?
It was about 50-50. The equipment obviously detected a signal and did preliminary analysis on it, but the precise analysis and the final determinations made by the operator.
That's pretty cool. How long did you do that?
What, electronic warfare?
Yeah, with the whole time?
I did. Yeah, that was my rate. I did that for 10 years. I had the perfect Navy career. Out of my 10 years, I spent 5 years at sea and 5 years at Pensacola.
Not a bad gig.
No, I did a year of school. Then I went to the West Coast and spent 3 years in the fleet. Then I went back to Pensacola for a year of school. Went to the East Coast, spent 2 years in the fleet. And then I went back to Pensacola and my final tour as an instructor for 3 years.
I mean, that's hard to beat. And you are probably one of I say a handful. Certainly you're the only person I know that did 10 years active Navy and then more than 10 in the Army National Guard, which for all intents and purposes is the Army. And you can attest to how well located Navy bases are versus Army posts.
Right. I don't think you could compare Virginia Beach to Fort Bragg and get anybody to voluntarily go to Fort Bragg.
All right, so this will be fun. What's your favorite Navy base?
Oh, Pensacola.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you went there 3 different times.
Right.
Maybe 4.
Yeah, I lived there for 5 years. Yeah, 3 different times.
That's a pretty sweet deal. What's your favorite Army post? if there's such a thing.
You want me to say Fort Pickett, don't you?
I definitely don't want you to say Fort Polk because that would be a lie.
I had fun at Fort Polk. I had fun at Fort Chaffee too. Oh man, it would have to. I would have to say Fort A.P. Hill.
Yeah, I mean, you and I spent a lot of time there. That's for sure. Did you ever get a chance to go out to Schofield Barracks or anything?
I drove by it when Cindy and I went to Hawaii.
Yeah, I spent 2 weeks at Schofield, and only the Army can find the worst part of Oahu and build an Army post there.
It's like red clay and lava rock, right?
Yeah, and you don't really have a sense of where you are. It's just kind of just nondescript. I mean, there's a mountain range. You can see that in the distance, but it's just couldn't believe it. There's stories I could tell, but we're not here to talk about my stories.
No, I looked at it when you go to when you go to Hawaii on an anniversary trip, you do the obligatory drive around the island one day. And we were driving up, and you got Schofield on the left, and you got Dole Plantation on the right. And I'm like, the Dole people were smarter than the Army people. They obviously sold all the non-productive land to the U.S. government.
I mean, I guess it's the Army was just trying to find the cheapest, largest space they possibly could wherever they were looking.
That's probably it.
Yeah. APL was your favorite, huh? Is it just because you spent so much time there and you have some familiarity?
Right. And it's close to home. I mean,
Yeah.
It's not too far from the porch right now. But it also reminds me of West Virginia. People think AP Hill's not flat.
No, it's definitely not.
And there are a lot of places that remind me of home. And obviously, I think I've spent more time there since I left the Army than I did before, although it'd be close because I hunt and fish over there all the time.
Yeah.
And I can just sit up in a tree and just imagine being back home.
All right, let's go back to Navy. You did 10. A lot of people who do 10 years active duty, regardless of the branch, are thinking, well, I've already done 110. I could do a second 10. And a lot of guys say, I'm going to do 20. What happened with you in the Navy around the 10-year mark?
Well, at this point, I'd gotten over the underachieving portion of my life. So I was doing well. I punched all the tickets I needed to have a successful back-end Navy career. But I'd also gotten married, and my first son had been born. He was born in August, and I was due to re-enlist in December. And the detailer was a friend of mine, and he's like, I can have my pick of any ship on his list. And but he advised me that if I wanted to make a Master Chief, I needed to pick an aircraft carrier or a battleship. And out of those two, I would have easily chosen the battleship. But they spent a lot of time at sea. And I struggled with it. And I just couldn't imagine dropping a young wife and a newborn baby on a pier in Norfolk and going out to sea for 9 months. So I decided to try another career.
Yeah, there are a lot of folks in the Navy that make that decision and get out around the same time you did. And some stay in. And frankly, I don't know how the ones that stay in do it.
I don't either, because even at our point, all my friends were on second, third wives. And so every time we get together down at the schoolhouse, and all the instructors and their wives, and they were amazed that we had just gotten married. We got married late in life, but that we were each other's first husband and wife, because everybody else was blended and on multiple weddings. So it's a Navy life for sure.
Yeah. All right, so what was the idea when you finally decided you were going to take your wife and your newborn somewhere else? Where were you headed?
Well, I wanted to stay in Pensacola, but Cindy wanted to move back closer to home, closer to family. So when we had done a lot of work supporting the electronic warfare people at Dahlgren, because at the schoolhouse, we had every EW system that was in the fleet. And because we trained technicians. So our systems were pristine. They were groomed every day. So anytime there was a problem or something that needed to be solved from Dahlgren, they would send their techs, and their engineers would come down and use our lab, and we would assist them. So I made some contacts. So I was offered a job with a contractor at Dahlgren to come up and do electronic warfare, support the development of engineering change proposals, software refinement, stuff like that, hardware, software enhancements. And it was close to home. And so we took that job and we moved up here. We actually picked Ladysmith. I can remember when we did it, we didn't know where we wanted to live, but we were looking at a map, a paper map of Virginia and where Dahlgren was. And we picked the Ladysmith because it was equidistant between DC, Richmond, and Dahlgren. And I thought I could always find a job between one of those three places. And it was a cool name, Ladysmith, Virginia. So
Wait, is
that's
Cindy,
how
is
we.
Cindy, sorry, is Cindy from Virginia or West Virginia?
She's from West Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the DC Richmond corridor with a little jaunt over to Dahlgren, that was close enough to home for both of y'all.
Right. We could, we can be in West Virginia in 4 hours from here. So it was close enough without being too close.
So how long did you do the gig at Dahlgren?
Well, I'm almost 3 years, but I was also a traditional guardsman too. And because I had invested 10 years, so I wanted to do something. So obviously I called the Navy first. They didn't have any billets in the Navy Reserve. The best they could do for me was I could drive to Norfolk, drill without pay. They would double slot me. I would come down. They would feed me and give me a place to sleep on the ship, but I would be double slotted. And then when that guy died or retired, I could have his slot. So I called the Marines, and they said they would love to have me, and I could join unit at Quantico, but I had to go to Paris Island for 16 weeks. So.
Yeah, and you were already in your late 20s at this point, right?
Right. I was 29, maybe. Yeah. And so I called National Guard and joined the National Guard there in Fredericksburg.
When did you know the National Guard existed?
I mean, we always knew there was a National Guard. We had National Guard in West Virginia, but as a viable option to serve, probably about a week after the Marines told me I had to go to Paris Island.
And then Fredericksburg was just a close enough unit for you?
Oh yeah, we were living in Fredericksburg at the time. We hadn't found a house in Ladysmith, so we were renting up in Stafford County.
What year was this when you joined the Guard there in Fredericksburg?
Well, the recruiter, and I won't say Sergeant Weston's name. Yeah, I started talking to him in December because I knew if I didn't want to lose anything, I had to transition rather rapidly. But he pushed me off till after the holidays, and I realized later after I started working with him, he was probably just moving me into a next quarter where he hadn't met his quota yet. He'd already met his quota for that fourth quarter. So I ended up joining and signing in March of 89.
Okay. Yeah, he definitely made his fourth quarter quota. It's no question.
That's what I thought. Otherwise, he'd have shoved me in quick.
And so you signed on with the Guard to be a combat engineer?
Yeah, I didn't know what it was. I had no idea. I just signed on the Guard. I thought I would just, do 1 weekend a month, get free hunting clothes, and build toward a retirement at some point.
You were going to get effectively an M-Day retirement with 10 years active duty in the Navy. That you had a lot of points, and I imagine you enjoyed your M-Day experience.
I did. It was really good because I was working as a systems engineering tech out at Dahlgren, and so it was a huge contrast to what I was doing at work. And my very first drill, I don't know if you remember Sergeant Major Herring.
Oh, are you kidding me?
He was my readiness NCO. They assigned me to Charlie Company, and very first drill, he took me out. We were blowing demo on my first drill, and he was just so personal, and he made a huge impact on me. And so I actually, you look forward to going to drill. In those days, we set the standard for the entire division back in the 90s. So all of our training was hard, fast, realistic. We were flying, blowing, or shooting every single weekend. So,
it was awesome.
Yeah. I loved every minute of it.
Yeah, Sergeant Major Heron, I could be around him for 10 hours a day, every day for a long time. I love being around Sammy.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun, man. He really is. And I enjoyed it. He had a huge impact on me. And so.
Well, he's smart as a whip, got a great sense of humor, and he's skinny. I would describe him as wiry or skinny, but he's strong. He was so strong.
Yeah, he had a grip that would just crush your head.
He would walk up to me. We'd be in some chow line, and I was a first lieutenant at the time. He goes, "Hey, sir, how many times you been promoted?" I said, "Once." And he goes, "I've been promoted 7 times." He was an E8 at the time.
That sounds like him.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, so when you and I were in Bravo Company together, we were doing that prep for JRTC, and you're right. We would get there early on a Saturday morning or late afternoon on a Friday, and it was nonstop. It was awesome. But when we would go nonstop, we'd maybe sleep an hour or two overnight Saturday, and maybe.
Yeah.
Sometimes we didn't. And I distinctly remember, and I give you this credit whether you want it or not, and this is not a positive thing for me. I was falling asleep about 03, and you and I were standing next to a tree or leaning against a tree or something. And you said, "Sir, you got to wake up." And I said, "I'm trying to stay up, sorry, Lilly, but man, I'm tired. I had a long work at my civilian job, and I'm just beat." And you said, "Well, stick this in your mouth." And it was Red Man. And I had a taste for Red Man for a long time, and then I transitioned to dip. And fortunately for me, I quit several years ago, but that's how it started.
Oh man, yeah,
it's impossible to fall asleep with that stuff in your mouth.
That's what I used to think.
Wait a minute, you fallen asleep with it in your mouth?
Oh yeah.
Oh man, that's a level of comfort with that I'd never experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we had fun. Demo ranges were my favorite. I couldn't believe I was getting paid to do that. I mean, It was awesome.
Yeah, I can remember the very first demo range I was on with Sergeant Major Heron, and we had gone down across this long bottom out in I'm trying to think of the range, CA-25, and we gone across, and we were blowing an abattis on the other side of the creek.
Hold on, you can't. For our non-military folks, describe what an abattis is.
An abattis is where you drop the trees so that they form it. They interlock as they come down in sequence, and they form an interlocking barrier, and you use it to block a road, or in this case, we were just blocking a cut in the hillside. But you block an avenue of approach with just this massive tangle of fallen trees. And if they bring a dozer in and try to push you against it, it just gets tighter. It's just nasty. You have to cut them or blow them to clear them. But it's really an effective use of a limited amount of explosives to create an imposing obstacle for the enemy to try to get through or around.
Yeah, go ahead. I interrupted your story. So you were headed through the bottom.
Yeah, so we went over there, and we just placed charges on probably 50 trees. And they were all daisy chained together, and it was beautiful. And when we got to the end of the deck cord, we had this spool. Now, mind you, this was my first drill with the National Guard, and we had the spool that the deck cord came off of, and we're like, and I had this bright idea. Maybe I was influenced, but we wanted to see how far we could launch it, and we also thought it'd be a good visual for when we got back to the other side of the valley before we blew it. So we duct taped it to the tree, and then we popped the charges, and we go across, and we got our watches, and we get up on the other side, and we're sitting there and we're looking at our watches, and Sergeant Major Heron goes, "Where's my spool?" And I'm like, "What? You got 45 seconds, 44, we're doing a countdown.
Oh.
He's like, the spool that the deck cord was on, where's it at? And I'm like, you can't see it. It's right there. It's that big brown spot on that pine tree. And he got so mad. And I had no idea why I got mad until I became AGR because, we blew right on time and his spool was gone. But in order to clear the ASP, you have to turn all your residue in.
Yep.
That empty spool was indicative that you'd expended all the deck cord. And he cleared the ASP. I don't know where he got a spool, but it was the one he had. But the look on his face when I said, it's right there, and I pointed it out to him.
And he wasn't going out there to get it.
No, he did not go after it. But it was the start of a beautiful friendship.
Yeah, I haven't talked to him in a long time. I'd love to reconnect with Sammy. Have you ever been on a demo range where you had to clear a misfire?
Yeah.
Is that the most stressed that you've ever been in your life? It was for me.
I would say, yeah. I mean, honestly, I've got strong faith, but we literally prayed before we walked down the range on this one. This one, I mean, being a combat engineer, nobody's going to clear your misfires for you.
Nope.
So and again, this involved timber charges at AP Hill. We had wired them. We'd put them in, and it was not electric. So when I say wired, we just placed them, and we'd run our deck cord, and we popped the charges. We went back, and they didn't go. That's the worst feeling ever when you're on your countdown, and then it doesn't go. So you give it your safety time, it doesn't go. So we had to declare a misfire, but thunderstorms were rolling in. And they put us on a lightning hold. So now we have thunderstorms, we have lightning, we've got a whole road that was lined with trees on either side that are live. They've got C4 taped to them. They've got everything in place, but they just didn't go. And so we sat there, and they'd give us a clearance, and we'd start out, and then they would shut us down and pull us back while these thunderstorms were rolling. And it was about midnight when we had a window where we could go down and try to clear the shot. And I'm trying to remember the lieutenant's name that went with me. I don't like to use other people's names here, but I had a lieutenant, and then I had another sergeant, who both traditional soldiers who had actually, one was a range OIC, the other was a range safety. And I had just kind of gotten pulled into this. I hadn't even seen him. It wasn't my shot. I was there. And so we go down range, and I can remember there were still flashes of lightning in the distance, but they were far enough away from us that we felt we had some time. And it was eerie because everything was still, rain was coming down and lightning was flashing. You'd see these trees and you'd see that C4 sticking there. And so we found a break, we repaired it, but we only had one fuse igniter left. And this one might get me in trouble, sir. We might have to edit this one. But,
well, tell me the parts that you're not worried about.
we only had one fuse igniter left. So I cut a chunk of C4. I trimmed all the deck, because the deck cord had been laying in the rain, and time fuse, everything. So I trimmed the time fuse back. I took this chunk of C4, molded around the end of the time fuse, and then I had them pull the 1M60 that they had, and then I used the Zippo lighter and ignited the C4 on the end of the time fuse. And I mean, there was some serious pucker from the lieutenant and the other sergeant when they saw me put that Zippo up to the C4 and set it on fire. But we backed off, and the blew both. Either the primary or the secondary, but either way, we cleared that shot that night. And when we went back out the next morning in the daylight, there was still some C4 that hadn't detonated, but we disposed of that properly in accordance with. And yeah, that was probably the most puckered up I've been.
Yeah, I mean, I've never done this, but you could take a hammer to C4 and it's not going to do anything. Like you just described, you can set C4 on fire, and just that alone, it's not going to do anything. But if you do both,
right? Don't set it on fire and try to put it out with a hammer. That would be wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, I won't tell my misfire story, but I will agree that the pucker factor was unbelievable. Whew.
Yeah, I remember that time I almost killed you with a dozer at AP Hill. Do you remember that?
No, tell me more.
We were down on Paint Can Alley. Okay. And I was working to get my dozer license. This was when I was your construction foreman, and you were the salt and barrier platoon leader. And I'm sitting there, you're standing there talking to me, and I'm trying to learn how to maneuver around on the dozer. And you moved, and I didn't see you move, and I moved the dozer, and the blade just whisked by your head. And obviously it didn't impact you, but I still remember it to this day because I thought for sure I'd kill you. I was going to lose my
job. I blissfully do not remember that. Did we talk about it afterwards?
Yeah, but I think we were overcome with the fact that we started turning up unexploded mortar rounds. And we had to call that time the EOD did come down from Quantico and collect them all. Right.
Oh my gosh. I have stories from my 2 years in that platoon that I still can't talk about.
Yeah. I think that overshadowed any near miss I had with the dozer blade on your head.
Probably would have just knocked me out.
Yeah. You'd have gone with it.
my head's pretty soft too, so I'm sure it wouldn't have done any real damage. Cool. All right. So you did about 11 in the guard, AGR plus some M-Day time?
You're right. Yeah. Well, it all totaled out. I want to say they gave me credit for maybe 12.
Okay.
Active once the M-Day time rolled in. Yeah.
Gotcha. So you did a full 20, and you were in your early 40s?
Early 40s when I retired, right?
And so what was the idea? You'd get some retirement pay right away and then go do whatever you wanted to do?
Yeah, I did. I didn't really have a plan. And again, I'm just so grateful that God always has a plan, because I didn't really have a plan other than I was going to retire. And I couldn't get promoted, even though I'd been selected for sergeant major. There weren't any slots. And a couple of us NCOs we always complained about a log jam at the top, and we promised each other we wouldn't be the log jam. So I could have sat around for a couple more years and gotten promoted, but I was also holding up 4 or 5 people behind me from being promoted. So I just made a decision to go ahead and retire, and I moved out, and I was job fair in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And I'll never forget Suzanne. I'd gone around, and I had, back in those days, we still had paper resumes, and I'd handed out my resumes, and I had one resume left. And I walked by this woman, and I looked, they had their little placards, and I'd read her signboards, and I wasn't interested. I wasn't buying what she was selling. So I was leaving, and she called me. She called me out. And I went back to her, and she told me, I'm like, look, ma'am, I don't want to deploy right now. I said, that's why I left. I got wife, kids. And she said, well, let me have your resume. We have some potential opportunities coming up. And she basically twisted my arm, and I gave her my last resume. And I told her that. And we actually, Suzanne and I became really great friends. But they called me and offered me a job, and I went to work for RDR doing embassy security up Northern Virginia, and I was stateside. We deployed a lot of people, but they hired me as a trainer, And I went in and learned the equipment and the systems and trained. And then I moved up into operations, became the operations manager there before I left. I was there a little over 6 years.
So you never deployed because you said going in, hey, I'm not doing this for deployments.
No, they once I got in, and I really enjoyed it, and there were a couple of times I did want to go, but once they realized that I could do math and make PowerPoint slides and count and stuff like that, they kept me back. I just ran the ops center.
You had all your fingers and toes at this point.
Right, I did, and I could keep track of everybody else's fingers and toes, and that was more important than me out there somewhere in the world just doing the security thing.
It sounds like you enjoyed that job.
I did. It was an incredible job, an incredible experience with incredible people. I really did enjoy it. And
how long did you do that?
I did it for almost 7 years, a little over 6 years.
And then I'm going to butcher this. You ended up working for the Air Force and eventually Space Force.
Right. Well, yeah, it became Space Force after I left.
Oh, I wish you were still there when it was Space Force.
I do too. Just having an email that says space.com just sounds so much cooler than, or space.mil, whatever it is. But no, it was still the Air Force, but I did work space surveillance. I went to work for, at that time it was ITT.
Yeah.
Then they spun off as Excelis, which was acquired by Harris, which merged with L3 to become the L3 Harris industry that we know now. But did work on the Air Force space surveillance system, which was incredibly cool. I mean, it's a series of 9 radars that ran roughly along the 33rd parallel from East Coast to West Coast of the United States. Built back during the Cold War was when it fully came in, but it was actually built in the late 60s. There was a executive order from, I want to say it was President Eisenhower. It was right after the Russians put Sputnik up in the air. He issued an executive order that said, find it. He needed a system that could find and track that. And Navy engineers built it. And within a year, we were tracking that first space object. And that was the first object put in a space catalog. And when I left there after 12 years, I couldn't begin to guess how many objects are in the space catalog right now. But every item in space has to be cataloged and accounted for. And it was really critical when we were doing manned space flights. When we were flying shuttles up and down. And even with the ISS up there, it's critical that you know where everything is at every given moment.
Yeah, I mean, there are hundreds of objects, if not more, right?
Oh, there's tens of thousands of.
Really?
Well, it's countless, but when you look at the ones that are of magnitude to do harm to, one of our satellites or the space station or something like that, tens of thousands.
Wow.
There's a huge debris field. I think you can Google it, Lockheed Martin or any just space debris field, and it'll show the Earth with the debris field going around it. It's like there's a lot of trash up there.
And most of it's man-made?
I would say all of it's man-made. Yeah.
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 That's wild. I mean, so you're talking about Eisenhower, the technological advancements that were made back in the late 50s and through the 60s and into the 70s would blow most people's minds, right?
Oh, it's amazing. In the museum at Dahlgren, we had a slide rule that they used to calculate the position of objects in space. Slide rule is 5 foot long. It's amazing, a humongous slide rule, and they did all this with slide rules and pencils and paper. The antenna that we had in Texas, arguably the the largest, most powerful antenna, VHF antenna in the world. The antenna field was 2 miles long, and it was perfectly level from one end to the other end.
Mm.
I mean, they did it without lasers. I mean, you can't even hang a picture in your house now without a laser level.
Right.
And these guys did it with just transits and string, man. It's amazing how far we've come.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Yeah, and of course now the digital age, we seem to be advancing technologically at breakneck pace. I can't keep track of most of it.
No, I can't either. It's moving way too quick.
All right, so Tim, you retired recently. What does it feel like to be retired now?
Well, it feels pretty good. I'm slowly settling into it. I retired one December, and we rolled right into the holidays, so it was not a routine or anything. So it just kind of felt like prolonged Christmas. But now that I'm about halfway through January, I don't have to go back to work, and it's pretty nice. I was actually, my brother-in-law retired. He retired the same time I did, and so he's actually doing these TED Talks. So he turned me on to a TED Talk about the 4 phases of retirement. And I'm still in phase 1, which is vacation. I'm just going to protracted vacation right now.
Yeah, I would have guessed phase 1 is vacation. What's phase 2?
Depression.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
phase 2. Don't tell me 3 and don't tell me 4. I'm hoping phase 2 doesn't last very long for you.
No, I don't think it's going to last long. Phase 3 is when you start exploring activities and stuff that you want to do with your life. And then phase 4 is when you're actually what he calls move into full retirement, to where you're able to enjoy and give back and just have this incredible retirement experience. But a lot of people get stuck in phase 2.
Yeah.
And some people just stay there.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about your family here as we close out, but having Cindy around for your retirement, I imagine there's no way you're going to get stuck in phase 2.
I don't think she'll let me. Not at all, man. She's going to keep me.
I'm going to ask you a really odd question, Tim, but it's meant to be a little more revealing about who you are as a person. All right, so you've got your own talk show, one day or night only. You've got an hour and a half. You get to invite 3 guests. You get to invite a male guest, a female guest, and a musical act. Your guest can be alive or dead, right? The magic of this one show is if you want to talk to somebody who's already passed, you can bring them back for your show. That you can try to entertain, you can be thought-provoking, you can be fun, you can be whatever you want it to be. Who are your 3 guests?
Yeah, you could have given me that on the read ahead.
No, there's no way. It's more fun surprising you with it.
Right. Well, I'd like to sit down with Ronald Reagan, President Reagan, and I think he would be the person I'd want to sit down with.
He was this wonderful combination of being wise, very, very likable, had a good sense of humor, and understood a lot of things that I think most people couldn't comprehend.
Right, and he knew how to appeal to people. He knew what was important. He had this manner about him that, I don't know how to describe him. I really wish I'd have gotten to meet him when my time. I got to vote for him. I got to experience the generosity of his terms as president. We saw a tremendous change in how our country moved when President Reagan came in. Certainly being in the Navy and in the fleet, I knew what it was like to be at sea under the Carter administration, opposed to when President Reagan took over. and how we conducted ourselves and how we were able to move about the world in a better way. So definitely President Reagan as a male guest. If we move to a female guest,
And you can do musical act next if you want to.
yeah, I'd like to sit down with Jethro Tull.
So wait a minute, you're gonna interview him and you're gonna let him play, right?
Oh yeah, he has to play as part of the interview.
Why Jethro Tull?
I don't know, man. I like his story. I like his music. I like his ability to tell a story as opposed to just singing a song. To create almost I don't know. He creates almost like his own little biosphere when you're listening to Jethro Tull.
Yeah, and so the band is Jethro Tull, and you're talking about Ian Anderson, the person.
Ian
right?
Anderson, right?
Yeah.
So does that count as two?
No, that you're good. That counts as a musical group or musical act. A lot of my military guests have a tough time coming up with a female guest for whatever reason. It could be a family member too.
Well, I was going to say I just love to sit down with my grandmother. She passed actually when I was in the Navy, and I was able to get home on leave for her funeral, but I never got to sit down and talk with her as an adult. I was always a kid, and she was grandma, but she lived an amazing life. She was born in 1898. I mean, she rode a mule to school.
Wow.
But she had 13 kids, 11 of which survived. During World War II, my grandfather and 5 uncles were serving at the same time. My grandfather was he was a World War I veteran. He had been a corporal in World War I. Then when Pearl Harbor happened, he tried to join up, and they said he was too old. But he was a surveyor, so we actually ended up at Pearl Harbor with the Army Corps of Engineers doing the rebuild. And then I had 2 uncles that were in the Marine Corps, one of which was shot on day 3 of Iwo. But he survived, and he actually got to link up with his dad at Pearl Harbor. It was amazing, you know. Then I had 2 uncles that were Army, and then 1 uncle that was Navy. And my dad was the littlest out of all those. He was a baby, and he was too young to go. So he actually did his time in the fleet off the coast of Korea.
Yeah.
So
it's a lot of service from your family.
Yeah, and just the fact that grandmother can navigate all that. And I remember as a kid, I mean, she made a tremendous impact because holidays, it would be like everybody was home, you know, all 11 kids and 100 cousins. And she was a matriarch. And she went from riding a mule to getting a driver's license later in her life. She saw a microwave oven, man. You know?
Yes. Sounds like she was a force.
She was. And I really wish I could just sit down and speak to her like we're talking right now and ask her about her life and growing up in backwoods, Appalachia. And yeah, she was an incredible woman.
Yeah, the story she could tell, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. All right, well, tell me.
I mean, I had my hands full. I was just going to say I had my hands full with 2 Lilly boys. I don't know how she wrangled 6 of them.
Yeah, because you know what it's like to be a Lilly boy.
That's right.
All right, so tell me about your family, your wife Cindy, your boys, and your grandkids.
I'm blessed with an incredible family. obviously my sons. I've got one that's lives in Mechanicsville, and he's beautiful wife Beverly, Craig and Bev. They've got Harper and Wade Timothy, no less.
Nice.
We call him our super baby. He is almost 4, but he's going on like 14. He has no fear, no nothing. He's incredible, and they're really awesome. And it's so good to have him so close to us that we get to see him often and spend a lot of time with the kids. And my younger son, who actually he deployed to Iraq when you were his commander, believe it or not.
Oh, in 3rd Battalion.
Right.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, that's kind of cool how that came full circle. You and Sergeant Major Ferris, I think I bumped into you at deployment day.
Yeah, in Fredericksburg, right?
Right.
Yeah. It's a crazy small world, Tim. Crazy.
I'll tell you. But Scott married a beautiful girl out in King George County, and they live out in the country and have 2 fantastic sons, Mason and Hunter. And both the boys are doing good. Girls are doing good. I mean, we've been blessed. And Cindy is just Cindy. She's awesome. And she holds us all together and keeps us going, moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I have to ask you about your granddaughter. How long had it been since there had been a girl born in the family?
Well, I'm doing math. It's over 50 years. But my baby sister just turned 60. Harper's 6, 54 years.
Wow. That's how long I've been on Earth, Tim.
I know.
It's a long time.
Mom had one son, me, and but then she had 9 grandsons. And I thank God that she was able to meet Harper and see that great granddaughter before she passed there a couple of years ago. But yeah, that's a long time. Done nothing but boys, and now
Harper's got maybe a lot of pressure or no pressure on her, and I imagine she gets a lot of attention. I'm guessing
she does, but she demands a lot of attention. But I'm not saying that not because she's demanding or in any way, but she's tough, and all the kids they stand out in the crowd. And I'm not just saying that as grandpa. I've heard it from other people too.
I get you.
She's definitely a little bit above.
So what are their ages again? 6, 4, and what about the boys in King George?
Well, both of the boys are close together. Wade actually doesn't turn 4. Harper's little brother. Harper's 6. Mason turned 4 in December. Wade will turn 4 in March. And Hunter turned 2 in December.
It's a lot of fun when you're with them all, right?
Oh, yeah. It's incredible. And Harper's got to be the boss because she's the queen. But then we're just her servants, man.
There are worse jobs.
Yeah, there is. But it's a lot of fun.
All right, so Tim, you're in phase 1 of retirement. How quickly do you think you move to phase 4? Or you're not worried about it because phase 1's vacation? Why would you think about that?
I'm not. I'm giving it a couple of years.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to do some hiking. I'm section hiking the Appalachian Trail. So I'm actually looking for about 3 or 4 good days here, maybe next week, to go out for a couple nights. But I don't see myself slipping into phase 2. Cindy will be the one to catch it if I do. But I do. I didn't realize how routine driven I was, which garners a bunch of laughter, after you spend as much time as I have basically in service. Because even after I retired, I was working for government agencies doing government stuff. But I think once I get in a rhythm and get a decent routine going, I'm thinking 2 years, maybe just a year.
I imagine your phase 2 will last 10 minutes and Cindy will pick up on it at minute 4.
Yeah, it won't last long. But no, I'm kicking around some ideas. We really don't know. It's something that Cindy and I are approaching as a couple. We talk about our fourth quarter because we know we're in the fourth quarter of our life. So we don't know what God has planned for us, but what we do know is we're going to be available and we're going to be receptive. So whether it's taking care of grandkids or doing mission work somewhere or whatever, we're just going to be available and receptive and just try to spend our fourth quarter in a positive way and maybe impact some other lives.
Yeah, that's two good ways to be, and I imagine you will have a very fulfilling fourth quarter.
We're looking forward to it, man. We are so excited.
Well, Tim, this podcast is the reason we reconnected, and so I'm happy I'm still doing this. I would like to think that I would have tried to reconnect with you on my own, but when I thought about having guests on the podcast, I thought about guys like you and Don Willis and Sammy Herron, Carl Holcomb. The list goes on and on. And in fact, I don't know what it is about me, but I have an affinity for some of the officers I serve with, but I really have an affinity for NCOs, especially the AGR guys. And you were definitely one of them.
Well, thank you, sir. You were my favorite lieutenant.
I knew enough to let you do your thing.
That's that, and that is so true. I mean, but we also support each other, and you were definitely my favorite lieutenant. I can say that even with a grin on my face, but it's truthful. It is from the heart, and well, I think of you often. Believe it or not, there's often something will pop up, and I'll think of you.
Well, you and I appreciated hard training. We enjoyed each other's company, and we had a lot of respect for each other. And it's hard to beat those in combination. Yeah.
No, it was good times for sure.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.